really interesting to see the Huffington Post, because the first day it was harassment. A few hours later, it was assault. And then it gets spun into rape culture.
Inside of 2 weeks, Fitzgibbon's staff had turned on him, his company shut down. Here's where shades of gray color the picture. Fitzgibbon admits to inappropriate behavior toward female employees, but nothing criminal.
Are you finding that in this environment of women should be believed, that there is a downside?
I think what we're faced with is it's a he said, she said thing. So to say that you're just always going to believe the woman really doesn't get us anywhere.
The more time I spend in Afghanistan, the less I know about Afghanistan.
How would you describe what you see as the U.S. strategy there, and what would you say, if anything, is wrong with it?
I don't think anyone really knows what the final objective is, because if we haven't figured it out in 17 years, then there's definitely a problem.
Do you know how many children bring some sort of computer device to school?
Between 8 and 9 out of 10 students bring some sort of digital device to school these days.
Most of the teachers you polled think digital devices are harmful to students' physical and mental health.
7 out of 10 teachers say that digital devices are harmful to students' mental health, but that's in contrast to nearly 70% of parents who say that digital devices on whole are helpful to their students' mental health. So there is a stunning difference there.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. From the fall of Hollywood's Harvey Weinstein to the political demise of New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, there's been no shortage of sexual abuse allegations against famous men. The MeToo movement has liberated women to talk about long-tolerated misconduct. But it's also led to whispers about the gray area between improper harassment and criminal assault, and questions about whether it's now easier for people to get smeared by unproven or even false allegations. Today's cover story is Shades of Gray.
If you've got two believable stories, you can take anybody down.
Trevor Fitzgibbon claims it happened to him. His story begins in December 2015 when he ran his own progressive PR firm and got a fateful call from his company's vice president.
Who said, "We have a problem," and I said, "What's wrong?" They said, "Well, in the past 48 hours, our head of HR has gotten 6 phone calls all accusing you of sexual harassment." And my heart kind of fell.
Before that call, Fitzgibbon had angered some fellow liberals for his support of Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton and for representing clients connected to WikiLeaks. He represented Bradley Manning, who passed classified materials to WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden, the government whistleblower WikiLeaks once helped, the journalist Snowden leaked to, Glenn Greenwald, and he represented WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. The WikiLeaks connection will come into play later. Fitzgibbon says after the HR phone call, before he even knew who his accusers were, they had gone to the national press.
And it's really interesting to see the Huffington Post, because the first day it was harassment. A few hours later, it was assault. And then it gets spun into rape culture.
Inside of 2 weeks, Fitzgibbon's staff had turned on him, his company shut down. With help from feminist lawyer Gloria Allred, 3 women filed criminal complaints. One of them, attorney Jessalyn Raddick, claimed Fitzgibbon touched her breast against her will, then days later, when she met up with him at a hotel, raped her.
It was 100% consensual.
So you did have sexual relations with her?
Yes. But it was 100% consensual.
Here's where shades of gray color the picture. Fitzgibbon admits to inappropriate behavior toward female employees and to cheating on his wife with Raddick, but nothing criminal. Evidence he gave prosecutors included friendly sexual text messages and photos allegedly sent by Raddick before and after the alleged assaults.
Text messages, photos that she sent me after the first alleged assault took place, and then afterwards being very happy.
After reviewing the text messages and conducting a lengthy investigation, prosecutors declined to file criminal charges.
So for a year, you lived under the cloud of possible prosecution for rape.
Yes.
And what happened in that time frame to you?
I couldn't defend myself in the press. I was vilified in the national media and on social media. And the accusers and whatever political machine came after me used it to poison the water to make it almost impossible for me to get work.
You lost your business.
I lost my business, I lost my home.
This is the worst case scenario.
Attorney Nicole Smith defends companies against sexual harassment claims and isn't connected to Fitzgibbon's case. She says the current environment can breed confusion and even false allegations.
The MeToo movement is phenomenal, but it also is a catchphrase for conduct that really is every scope of any kind of allegation, from a slight that someone might feel that they had been disrespected to actual criminal conduct. So couching all of that conduct in one term is difficult then when you try and unravel individual claims.
Some victims' advocates say accusers should automatically be believed. The recent conviction of entertainer Bill Cosby for allegations that were 14 years old seemed to make the case, but it's not always cut and dry.
Are you finding that in this environment of women should be believed, that there is a downside?
So often in these cases, I think what we're faced with is it's a he said, she said thing. There's not a lot of witnesses, if any, ever present. So to say that you're just always going to believe the woman really doesn't get us anywhere.
It may also open the possibility that accusations can be weaponized to smear a target for hidden motives. Fitzgibbon began to suspect he was the target of a smear right after it was announced he wouldn't be charged, yet he was attacked in a national press release.
And that press release was of a letter signed by 72 national organizations pledging to never hire me or work with me again.
What'd you think of when you saw that?
It was one of the first times that I realized that something else is at play.
He'd sold his house, was split from his wife and children, including infant twins, and was too discredited to find work. Fitzgibbon now thinks powerful people may have come after him because of his PR work for enemies of the mainstream Democratic Party and the state, including WikiLeaks. In 2016, WikiLeaks published embarrassing insider emails of Hillary Clinton officials and the Democratic National Committee. And WikiLeaks was accused of working with Russia and being pro-Trump. There's little doubt there are powerful efforts to smear WikiLeaks and its supporters. Government contractors circulated this dossier in 2010, a wide-ranging strategy to combat the WikiLeaks threat, to sabotage or discredit WikiLeaks supporters using social media exploitation and disinformation. This is an internal PR sort of type document on...
It shows the photos and the names of individuals that were supportive of WikiLeaks or worked with WikiLeaks.
And the PR document specifically discussed going after these people,
ways to
discrediting
discredit,
them.
to target, to smear them.
Several targets were Fitzgibbon's clients. 2 were discredited by sex claims alleged in the media but never prosecuted, just like Fitzgibbon. WikiLeaks' Assange and a key associate, Jacob Appelbaum. With Assange, 2 women told a journalist that consensual sex with him when he was in Sweden for a speech turned into rape. A rape investigation hung over his head for 7 years before it was dropped last year. Anonymous accusers started a website to publicly accuse Appelbaum of groping and rape. He was forced out of his job, but also never charged. In the end, a smear campaign can often take advantage of the uncertainty surrounding a case of he said, she said. And that's the problem. Fitzgibbon asked a lawyer's disciplinary body to punish Raddick for alleged false allegations. They declined, saying the question was close, but the truth about what occurred in private is sometimes hard to prove.
Even if someone isn't ultimately prosecuted, they may find they're tainted just because this aura of inappropriateness or criminality
lingers over them regardless of what the outcome is in the court of law.
And the costs that they incur, obviously representing themselves in that proceeding.
Did you do any of these things that the women said you did?
In regards to being flirtatious,
Anything that they said was inappropriate?
you know, I'll say this. I was accused of assault, and I was accused of first-degree assault, which is rape. And I didn't do any of that.
Fitzgibbon now has filed a civil suit against Raddick alleging malicious prosecution and defamation. She declined our request for an interview due to litigation. For more on the people and groups that secretly smear for a living, check out my New York Times bestseller, The Smear: How Shady Political Operatives Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote. Ahead on Full Measure, a combat journalist wounded in Afghanistan talks about the expensive U.S. strategy there. A new report from the Inspector General says after 17 years of war against Islamic extremist terrorists and insurgents in Afghanistan, there have been 2,400 U.S. military deaths, tens of thousands of Afghan deaths, and we're approaching $900 billion spent on military and reconstruction. War correspondent Carmen Gentile writes about the conflict in his new book, Blindsided by the Taliban. While reporting in Afghanistan, he was hit in the face by a rocket-propelled grenade. In the video you're about to see, he's behind the camera interviewing Afghans when the RPG hits.
Hey, are you okay? No. Wait a minute. RPG.
I was injured by a rocket-propelled grenade that hit me in the side of the head. Fortunately for me, did not detonate.
In simple terms, for people who know we have troops in Afghanistan but really don't know why we're there and what they're doing, how would you describe that?
We went there because of Al-Qaeda and September 11 and the effort to root them out and to remove them from their comfy home that was given to them by the Taliban. Why we're still there 17 years later, if you ask me why I think we're there, I'm not quite sure.
What did you learn in the big picture from your time there?
The big picture that I learned there is that the more time I spend in Afghanistan, the less I know about Afghanistan. It is a very complex country in terms of their tribal dynamics, their history, the politics. There is several generations that have grown up in knowing nothing more than violence and fighting. If all the violence were to end today, there would still have to be several decades of healing before the country could maybe return to that time before the Soviet invasion.
How would you describe what you see as the U.S. strategy there, and what would you say, if anything, is wrong with it?
I think that there has been some mission drift over the years. And now we've gone from a period of initial invasion, then there was the shift toward Iraq, and Afghanistan was seemingly forgotten for a number of years until the Obama surge in '09. And during that period, it seemed as though there was a concerted effort to try to regain control of parts of the country that the Taliban had a firm grip on. Now, that control has returned to the Taliban, and in some places the Islamic State, that now that the U.S. has drawn down and the Afghan forces are in the lead. What they're trying to achieve with this recent escalation as ordered by the Trump administration, I have no idea. I don't think anyone really knows what the final objective is, because if we haven't figured it out in 17 years, then there's definitely a problem.
How do the Russians figure into this? I think you noted that the Russians are arming the Taliban government officials?
Well, the Supreme Commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan said in a recent interview that there was evidence that Russia was arming the Taliban. I can imagine that they are laughing their heads off in Moscow about that, frankly, considering the history with the United States and Russia in Afghanistan in the 80s.
You said the longer you were there, the more you understood that you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what things did you learn there that might be of interest to people outside Afghanistan?
The Afghan people that I met in rural Afghanistan are the strongest, hard-willed, determined people I've ever come across. They live in remote mountain regions, and they now do it under the constant oppression and fear of danger and violence from the Taliban and the Islamic State or other extremist groups. It takes a special kind of person to be able to endure and to even want to wake up every single day and continue to go about your daily life, have children, and survive. So that's one of the things I've learned is that if you want to be inspired by someone who endures, look at the Afghan people.
After he recovered from being shot in the eye, which took lengthy rehab and multiple surgeries, he continued reporting in Afghanistan. Coming up on Full Measure, the impact of electronic devices on kids. Teachers and parents take opposite views. We're starting to learn more about the impact of digital devices on a young generation's learning and mental health. Gallup recently surveyed K-12 teachers and found educators at odds with most parents. Gallup's Brandon Bastide gives us the results. First of all, do you know how many children bring some sort of computer device to school?
The estimates vary, but between 8 and 9 out of 10 students bring some sort of digital device to school these days, so it's a pretty prevalent occurrence.
Now, most of the teachers you polled think digital devices are harmful to students' physical and mental health. First, in terms of physical health, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. What were they saying?
Only 4% of teachers say that the devices are mostly helpful to their mental and physical health, which is to say that the rest either say it's harmful to them or are indifferent.
And that, I think, might be expected, but the number when it comes to mental health was pretty overwhelming. I think it was 69% said digital devices were more likely to harm a student's mental health. Were you surprised that number was so high?
7 out of 10 teachers say that digital devices are harmful to students' mental health. Only 4% see it as slightly helpful. But that's in contrast to nearly 70% of parents who say that digital devices on whole are helpful to their students' mental health. So there is a stunning difference there.
As a parent, what do you think may account for that? Why do parents think it's such a helpful thing when the teachers think it's not?
As parents, we have our kids use devices in ways that are very useful to us as parents, right? To distract them, to help them, avoid boredom in certain places. So I think potentially parents are looking at it in a slightly rosier lens, right, in terms of maybe the benefits parents get out of it. But I am surprised to see parents as high on, thinking these devices are helpful to their mental health.
So teachers very negative on students, the impact on their mental and physical health. But when it comes to students' education,
Yep.
For education purposes, did teachers see digital devices as more helpful or harmful?
Yeah, so overall, they see on education, when you ask them about education benefit, about 40% of teachers say they're mostly helpful to students' education. About 20% say mostly harmful, right? And the rest are kind of in the middle who say neither helpful nor harmful. So it's a net plus score, right? If you just say, how many percent are positive versus negative, 40 versus 20. But interestingly enough, it's still not a majority of teachers who see the positive benefit of digital devices on students' education. And that is surprising given the billions of dollars that have been invested in educational technology initiatives across schools. I mean, we're years into seeing these initiatives, and to see that there isn't even a majority of the teacher population saying that these devices are helpful to their students' education, that's a really important wake-up call, I think, for school districts, for educators, for the educational technology providers who are a big part of this as well.
Looking at all the questions you asked, what would you say is the main takeaway from the survey?
Well, overall, teachers and parents just have very different views about these devices, particularly on students' mental and physical health. And so I think that's something for all of us to start to think more carefully about. So as a parent, I'm already thinking about strategies about, encouraging my kids to not use these devices during the week. That's a new rule I have in the household. So we'll let them have access to it on the weekends, but there's no access to these during the week. Everybody needs to think about their own policies around this, but I think we have to be pretty good judges about the value of these things.
How old are your kids, the ones that you can keep off the devices during the week?
Yeah, so almost 7 and almost 9, and anybody who's a parent knows that if they've had access to these devices in any form, they're very addictive. There are things too that, of course, do have some benefits. So I see some of the benefits of this, and that my kids are learning to read and write now because they're texting me during the day while I'm at work, right? And so that's an interesting example. They don't have these at school, but when they're at home, they send a message to daddy. They're learning how to respond. How do you spell this word? And they're also using things like computer coding practice. And so I'm seeing some of the very important benefits of what these devices can do, but I also see the downside when I try to get my kids' attention and they've got their head buried in one of their devices and they don't even answer or respond to us after repeated attempts. So,
join the club.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure many people can relate to that.
Gallup also found that younger teachers are more likely than older teachers to see the devices as helpful to education. Coming up on Full Measure, an update to our investigation on MRI dye safety. The FDA has a new patient guide, but we found out you may not see it before your next MRI. A follow-up to our investigation on the safety of MRI dyes. After our first report last year on illnesses suffered by Chuck Norris's wife, Gina, the most problematic dyes containing the chemical gadolinium were banned in dozens of countries, including Japan and the European Union. Here in the U.S., though, the FDA decided to let them stay on the market with upgraded warnings and new patient guides that spell them out. Now, the patient guides are ready, but the FDA is allowing a lot of exemptions. You only have to be given the guide the first time you get an MRI, and only at an MRI center, not at hospitals. And if your healthcare professional decides for some reason it's not in your best interest for you to see the guide, they don't have to give you one. But this is important. The FDA says if you ask for a guide, you must be given one no matter what. Another follow-up to a story last month about Right to Try, which was stalled in the House of Representatives. It's a bill that gives terminally ill patients better access to experimental treatments. After our story, the House finally scheduled a vote and passed the Senate's version of the bill. President Trump has now signed it into law. Next week on Full Measure, it may be summer, but we're investigating snowflakes. That's the term given to a generation that's easily offended. Critics say snowflakes can't bear to hear ideas they disagree with so much that it becomes a threat to free speech. Have you found yourself having to explain, sometimes to a younger generation, why all speech is protected?
Oh, all the time. It's actually a common belief among many younger people that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment.
But is the culture of snowflakes exaggerated? We look at both sides next week on Full Measure. Until then, we'll be searching for more stories to hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.